No one online, I assume?
We've had several discussions about how to move forward with the urban renewal properties. So one of the ideas and objectives was to start looking at the Stimson property, which is located on Washington Street in Oregon City here. And the commission provided direction to engage with an environmental firm to look at any of the outstanding issues that may exist on that property related to the previous work that was done for environmental sampling. We have an extensive history of testing that was done, as well as a no further action letter from the Department of Environmental Quality. And so staff had requested the authorization to engage with an environmental firm to review the historical documents, get a good understanding of what exactly is the condition of the property that exists that would potentially be available for reuse. And then the Urban Renewal Commission asked that before any contracts get entered into, that information be brought back to the Urban Renewal Commission to get an understanding of the scope and the cost associated with that. So we did receive 3 bids. We are recommending that you authorize me as the executive director of the Urban Renewal Agency to enter into an agreement with Environmental Works. The quote right now is $5,500 for the initial work to do the background work. Depending on what that comes up, there may be additional steps that they do recommend, but this would get us started on really being able to go through the existing documents, the existing status of the property, and then potentially a recommendation of if there's additional steps we should take, or if this addresses the environmental concerns related to the property that's vacant and left.
Okay, questions from commissioners? Comments?
I guess what I would ask is, what was the basis for the decision of that vendor as a provider? Why did you feel they were the best of the 3?
You want to talk about that, James?
Yeah, sure. Good evening, commissioners. To answer your question, we looked at all 3, and while it's true that all of them were going to perform the same function with regard to phase 1, there were some differences. The one that we recommended actually took some time to get to know the property before submitting a bid. That was not the case in the other 2. The other reason was being is that the one being recommended has a team of people who will be working on the property with diverse backgrounds in terms of specialties. And in the event that the commission wanted to utilize those other specialties that we listed in the comparative analysis, you'd be able to sort of touch base with that company. So they were very well qualified to do what they proclaimed to do. And also, we had fewer references to additional costs with the recommended one. As you know, it's not, in this kind of situation, it's not appropriate just to choose the lowest bidder. In this situation, you certainly look at the qualifications of the team and what cost may be involved and their ability to do the work. So those are the qualifications.
All right, you've delved into it deeper than I. When I first read it, I thought another proposal looked better, but I'll defer to you. You've given it some thought. You've looked into it. Your statements, they hold water. I wouldn't disagree with the choice. So what I do hope that we're going to take advantage of data previously gathered. Specifically, I was just talking to Jerry Herman about the monitoring wells and the information provided by those. That's a matter of record, and that should be reviewed maybe as a starting point. But it sounds like they may have hopefully already taken advantage of that resource. If not, they need to. So that, I don't know how many wells there were. Was it 40? Jerry, how many wells were there? 40 wells?
not answering questions.
Never mind.
He can't hear you. So.
Anyhow, take advantage of data previously gathered and then see what the current state is versus what it was then. I'm not saying it would be the same.
Okay.
Member Griffin?
I don't have any objection to the choice of vendors.
I appreciate the spreadsheet. I did go read the contracts in total that you submitted. And I will say that based on my experience in doing phase 1 and phase 2 EAs, that I agree with your assessment. I also appreciated the fact that Environmental Works, as you stated, didn't just check the box, but they actually came out here to see kind of what they were dealing with. To me, that says a lot about a consultant when they can ask intelligent questions because of something that they visually saw. You can't do all of this work online or using GIS or, you know, using aerials. Sometimes you really, I mean, not sometimes, most times on this, you really actually need to go out and walk the site and look and see what's going on. I thought that it was interesting that you picked up on the project team, and I was kind of surprised that one of them didn't provide information who the project team was, because that's pretty standard in contracts, and that the other firm did not. I was looking for the environmental specialist, and then I read your chart after I read the contracts. So again, I thought that their level of detail was sufficient to get us the answers to the questions that we need. The other two providers were a little more vague about what it was that we wanted. I mean, there's standard language in the EAs. Yeah, we're gonna look at this, we're gonna look at this, we're gonna look at this, and then you check all the boxes. But I think that specifically the way that they responded to your request was different than the others, so I would concur with that as well.
Commissioner Neely?
It's just a question. I assume that both the location of the old freight depot and the Amtrak parking area is included?
What they said was adjoining properties. They didn't identify what that meant, but adjoining properties to the Stimson site.
The district still owns both of those?
I caught the first one, the Amtrak station and parking lot? Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
You say it does include that?
It said it was gonna look at the surrounding properties. We're primarily looking at the Stimson property. But at one time, this was all one lot. And
Metro site.
I'm not as familiar with that. When we purchased it, it was the Amtrak and the Stimson property, whereas Clackamette landscaping in was under one purchase. So what we're looking at is where was the testing done? Was there testing done on the Amtrak site, or how much was done on the Stimson site, which is the one of concern with where the mill was and some of those activities were. So I think this is that preliminary investigation to identify, you know, our primary look is at the Stimson property, and where it goes from there, based on what they find, you know, there may be additional work necessary. But from my standpoint, you know, the Amtrak station is built at this point.
Yeah.
So what about the EA that was done when we bought the property?
That's part of what they're looking at, is that going back to that original work that was done and where that sampling was done and what that no further action letter with DEQ means, and is there anything else we need to do or be concerned about on that property that we might not be aware of at this point?
Yeah, I would be interested. I think your question is a valid one, because let's just face it, the contamination isn't bound by a property line. And depending on which way it's going, you know, it could be running towards the Metro site, it could be running back, if they find any, and particularly if there was oil and all of that, it just doesn't stay. So it does migrate. And I know that their documents will show that if it's moving, it will indicate, you know, where it's going. But Metro may have some documentation on their EAs that they did when they purchased the site that might be helpful as well.
I presume the study includes core samples, and is there a geotech aspect to this on buildability?
No, this is looking at the environmental component. I think that would be the next discussion.
But it will tell us, for example, if there's so many feet of fill or whatever or not.
that would be another study necessary to do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And because there's a geologist associated with the recommended one, they could probably give some insight along the way, but it wouldn't be included in the cost because we were talking about a phase one.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Conkle, it's been my experience that even if there is a letter of no further action, I have done those, received that letter, but then also did additional testing and found out, oh, well, they didn't actually get everything or notice everything. So I would suspect that we probably will need a level 2, just because that's usually standard operating procedure, but I'm interested in what their assessment of the previous studies were and then what that means for us in the future. So I'll move that we concur with staff's recommendation to award the contract to is it Environmental Works?
I'll second. Okay, moved and seconded. Call the vote, please.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell.
Aye.
Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Denise McGriff.
Aye.
Commissioner Doug Neely.
Aye.
Commissioner Adam Morrow.
Aye.
And Chair Mike Mitchell.
Aye.
Motion passes.
So if I could just, before we go on to the next subject, if I could just bring up, in my mind, what I'm thinking about on the Stimson property is, you know, we've talked about, we knew we had this background information that was associated with some environmental testing of the site, some environmental cleanup that happened, and a no further action. And so we're starting from, okay, what did we do when we purchased this years ago, and what do we have to do to get it to a place of being able to be developed? Okay, so that's what we were focused on from the environmental analysis stage with this property. You know, I've heard lots of stories. My understanding is that there's quite a bit of fill on that property from historical uses that may or may not include, you know, sawdust. Whatever fill was put in is probably not engineered fill. So one of the things that we were talking about was, you know, how do we bring this property back into development, back to some type of a higher use? Shovel ready, whatever we're gonna call it. And part of that was getting an understanding of what we actually had. So my recommendation, my request would be to authorize myself and James to start doing that geotech work as well. In my mind, it would be going out, looking at the property with a geotechnical engineer to get an understanding of what is that site comprised of and where is it? If, let's just say there is a 200 by 200 foot area of unengineered fill of multiple substances that varies from 2 feet to 10 feet deep, right? Knowing that, I think, would help us, because what I would envision is we do the environmental, we do the geotech, we walk through some type of an RFP, RFQ process, and we get an appraisal as all part of the package of understanding what we have and what we're going to negotiate for a potential user, buyer of that site. So those would be the steps that I think are necessary now to do to get us to a point to be able to make a more educated decision about the potential use and value of that property as we try to find a partner to either construct something or buy that property from the district. That'd be my recommendation on how to move forward. And other things may come up as we learn more, right? I mean, we're in a floodplain, we're by the tracks. I mean, there's a lot of things going on at that property, but these are some of the basics that are specific to the actual property itself that we just don't have information on.
Getting that geotech work, would that be another contract you'd have to bring back to us?
It would be, well, and I guess that'd be my question for this commission. When I wear my other hat as the city manager, I can sign contracts up to $50,000. As the executive director of the Urban Renewal Agency, there is no direction as to what I can sign. Historically, I've followed the charter of Oregon City as a guide. I don't know if it's right or wrong, it's what I've done. So I think the Urban Renewal Agency, you could either provide me some guidance, I can either bring all the contracts back and you can approve them, and that's fine, we can do that. Or can operate similarly to I do when I operate as the manager. I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other. You know, if you want to see $5,500 contracts, I can bring those. don't know if
Do
it's
we have
necessary.
any, on our on-call services, do we have any geotechnical consultants that are on call?
We do.
Okay, then I would say.
The city does.
Yes, the city does. So I would recommend that that the Urban Renewal Agency utilize one of our on-call contractors, since they've already been vetted and all of that stuff. That would make the process a little easier if the commissioners would concur with that.
Any thoughts?
That'd be fine by me. I think the explanation you just gave is actually the background to my question. You know, there's the first study, and then there's the, you know, how many cubic yards of fill do we have, and what's the quality of it, and what needs to be removed, and what. So, I mean, to me, it's knowledge that we need to know about the condition of the property. And as far as advancing contracts without approval, you know, there's part of me that has no problem with it, and there's a part of me that says, in the interest of visibility, we should approve every one. But some of them are gonna be, if they're small dollars, I mean, we have the right to manage urban renewal properties, in my mind.
Would you have any kind of idea dollar-wise what you'd be talking about for geotech or study?
I don't. I'm probably guessing probably less than 15,000.
Yeah.
Just a way, just not completely understanding the scope of it. You know, I mean, a lot of what I've heard about the property is just through people talking about it. Like, I've never actually seen a study of the soil composition or of that property.
In my mind, those are core samples with cross sections and to see what
And
we have.
I've never seen that I'm aware of.
Do we want to authorize Mr. Conkle to go ahead with a maximum dollar amount before it comes back to us? Or are we just going to just say go?
I can make that motion. I
Okay.
guess I would move that we authorize our director of the Urban Renewal Agency to work through the city manager to pursue, to utilize on-call services that we already have contracted. I would say in addition to that, once you do that, I think we should look at the scope of work that they're going to propose. Just have, just run it by us so we can take a look at it, but you should, I think you're authorized, under the other hat I would concur with that same authorization for this project. So 50,000. But we want to look at the scope, we want to look at the scope of work, so,
Is that a motion?
yes.
Is there a second? Commissioner Smith, looks like you have a question.
I have a comment.
Okay.
We need a second.
Yeah.
I just think we want to keep this moving, and if we authorize him to go ahead, and we already have vetted the consultants that we already have on call, then, we've already gone through the process. We don't need to go back through and say, oh, this one's better than this one, because we're already working with the city. And I think, at this point in time, a geotechnical person who's working for the city can easily work for the Urban Renewal Agency.
Is the second withdrawn?
No.
No.
Okay.
I agree with that component of it. I would put like $15,000 on it, and then a review by us. And I only do that because I don't want any criticism from the community of things we're doing without public knowledge. And I do feel that we have the right to manage and improve, just like we would improve a city-owned house without getting into a bunch of difficulty. I don't see any problem with doing it, but I just want to keep,
So do you concur with that?
I think
Amendment.
15,000 is too low. I think you've got to at least go 25. And he's going to bring back the scope of work for us to take a look at. Make sure it covers
I'm not
everything.
interested in a bidding war.
No, I don't want to do a bidding
Set
war.
a number and let's
I
agree
know,
on it and do
I'm
it.
just based on my experience in contracting with people who do that, that's low.
All right,
I'm gonna
then
call the question.
There wasn't a second.
There wasn't a second. Okay, I'll second then.
Okay. Moved and seconded and called for the question. Commissioner Smith.
So my concern is what has already been sort of stated by Commissioner O'Donnell, but this Urban Renewal Commission is kind of going opposite directions of past Urban Renewal Commissions who very much tried for many years to separate the city and urban renewal in any possible way. so that they were, you know, that the properties were under the right categories, that the money going one way or the other was from the right places, because of the criticism of the past and concerns from the public, and it seems now we're going back. I wouldn't support it, because I just don't think, you know, everything that the public is seeing based on urban renewal that's controversial, it's our decision in the end, down to every penny. And so I would vote no.
So it's,
We're bringing back the scope of work to take a look at, which includes the dollar amount. That's not enough for
Well,
you
the
to...
scope of work won't have the dollar amount until we have the that would be, the scope of work would be, you're talking about the scope of work from the people who respond to an RFP?
I'm talking about the scope of work from the geotechnical person that we are going to hire as the urban renewal agency.
versus the dollar amount quoted, so I'm fine with that. I mean, and I'm fine with 25,000, up to 25.
Up to,
And then above that, we have a discussion.
Absolutely.
And more, yeah. I'm fine with that.
Can I have a restatement of the motion, please?
what did I say?
The thing is, enough things were not that clear here, and maybe in the perception of what the motion was, so
What
even
I'm
if,
suggesting is that we authorize the executive director of our urban renewal agency to contract with an existing on-call geotechnical consultant that they've already vetted. And that we bring back the scope of work for us to look at, to make sure that we're hitting all the points, and that he be authorized up to $25,000.
okay,
For just this contract or moving?
For just this geotechnical contract only.
Okay, is there a second to that motion?
He'd already seconded it.
yeah,
He just had to
okay,
restate.
I will renew the second.
Okay,
All right.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell,
aye.
Commissioner Rocky Smith,
No.
Commissioner Denise McGriff,
Aye.
Commissioner Doug Neely,
Aye.
Commissioner Adam Morrow,
Aye.
and Chair Mike Mitchell.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right, thank you. So we'll move on to item number 2, which is information, discussion, and direction related to Clackamette Cove. Mr. Conkle, back to you.
I did not get my pictures to Mr. Lewis yet, because he's not even here. He's not in town.
So, thank you. So this is the second item. It was information and discussion and direction related to the Cove. So in the staff report, provided a background of kind of the 2 updates that I had related to additional work that's been done since our last Urban Renewal Commission meeting. For those of you who weren't on the tour, so Urban Renewal Commissioners Mitchell, McGriff, O'Donnell, and Morrow participated in a site visit of the Lake Oswego Corporation facilities with lake water quality improvements and water quality improvements within Oswego Lake with Lake Corps staff. So this was an opportunity to go see the facilities that they utilize, understand how they deal with managing Oswego Lake, which has some similarities in that it is deals with temperature issues, it deals with blue-green algae blooms. It is a private lake, so it does have some differences, but we were able to talk with their staff there to understand they actually have 2 aeration systems that are utilized within the lake itself, as well as active management through monitoring and chemical application on that lake. So, you know, some really good parallels to what we've seen at the Cove, and some ideas to think about for opportunities to address some of the water quality issues that we see. The second update was that myself and Mr. Lewis met with representatives from the Portland Permits section of the United States Army Corps of Engineers to discuss the water quality issues at the Cove and what would be necessary to initiate either reinstating or a new dredging permit at the mouth. So through that process, they have a joint permit process with the Department of Environmental Quality as well as the Department of State Lands. Each agency obviously has different components of impacts that they're concerned about or that they would be addressing through that process. Additional consultation would be necessary with the Department of State Lands and Department of Environmental Quality as part of that joint permit. Initial studies would be necessary to understand the project scope and design, sediment structure, sources of contamination in the area, disposal area of any dredge material, habitat impacts. And then I would imagine there may be additional information requested as we begin or start to go through that process. I think the one thing it would be good to have a good conversation about is that whether we do talk about, dredging or shading or aeration or other proposals to try to improve water quality in there, is really just, it does feel a little bit from staff standpoint of a lack of clear understanding of which one is going to be most effective without a complete, really good understanding of what exactly are we trying to address. We know we have some water quality issue, we have some temperature issues, but that baseline data of, what is the temperature fluctuation throughout the year? What is the oxygen levels within the stratification of that lake? What are the temperature or what are the pollutant levels that we're seeing? What is the sediment makeup? So it's hard to say which one of these is going to be the answer right now, based on what we know to date. And then we did invite several members that you met with, Commissioner O'Donnell, and I'd be happy to answer any questions, or our intent was to, if it was okay with your Renewal Commission, to invite them up to be part of any discussions related to the Cove.
Yeah, I would say that the gentlemen seated here, that would be Jerry Herman, Richard Craven, John Borden, and Doug DeHart. They have met with me on 2 occasions, and their credentials are stated in the report that I published, and they are worthy credentials with a lot of years of experience. They are apolitical creatures. They have no political game in mind. They are simply here for a very narrow focus to improve the water quality in the Cove. End of story. And the matters we've dealt with so far, including the lake that we went to the other day, indicate that there may be some cost-effective solutions that do not necessarily involve a water exchange. And so the information we're gathering so far, lean toward chemical treatment with alum and aeration, and maybe we can avoid the dredging, and we can do different cost impacts. But in speaking with these gentlemen, and I'll let them speak because they're much more knowledgeable than I am, what we need to do is assess the condition of that body of water throughout the year. So it won't be a single study. I think it would be maybe monthly that, what are the contributing factors as you just enumerated? Is it temperature? Is it, water temperature? Is it flow rate? What is it? So at any point, if any of you 4 gentlemen wish to comment, please do.
What I'd like to do is, if there's no objection from any of the commissioners, I'd like to ask any or all of them to come up, and we can.
After we finish our discussion before they come up?
I'm asking if anyone objects to them coming up now, so apparently you do.
I have some questions for staff, not for them yet.
Okay, well, let's do that, then we'll handle questions for staff first, and then we'll ask these gentlemen to come up, so.
No, I just looked for him and he disappeared too. I was like, where'd Tony go?
So, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. One of the things that I thought would be helpful to just have a brief discussion about is there are generally similarities between Oswego Lake and the Cove, but one of the things, and I think you asked him the question, I didn't quite hear it, so we asked about debris coming down, so I'm assuming when they had that gate at the end, that's where some water comes in from the Tualatin, as I recall I said, so that's inflow. So on the other end, does it go out?
So
Because it is adjacent to, you know,
Willamette.
Willamette.
My understanding is that they do bring in water from the Tualatin, through what's called the Oswego Canal. I believe that, if I'm recalling correctly, it was about 2 cubic feet.
UCFS.
Yeah, it's
Per
not
day,
a, it's
I
not a,
think.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
not
it
a
was a
ton, but I
small
mean, it is,
amount.
so that's similar to us having the inflow from, you know,
A little bit, but there,
Yeah.
and I think one of the similarities is that during the summer months, no water goes over the dam.
right,
Any water reduction or management of that small amount coming in, there are multiple water rights off Oswego Lake for irrigation, that essentially becomes
Balance
the
it out.
equilibrium without them spilling any water. And my understanding is that, you know, during the rainy season or maintenance is when water is spilled. But generally, during the summer months, it's a contained water body that does not have a lot of movement because of the low amount of water coming in through the Oswego Canal and the fact that they're not spilling any water during the summer. I don't know if that answers your question.
and, yeah, the question I had for him that I didn't get answered was, on the other end, it's got a very minor connection to, you know, Willamette, so I mean, there's some going out, but it's so minimal that it doesn't really affect the water levels, is what I understood him saying.
During the summer,
Summer,
my understanding is that there is no spill from the lake to the Willamette. I think it happens during the winter rainy season and during maintenance.
So in our situation, before the, you know, when it was being dug out as the gravel pit, and this goes, oh gosh, when we were talking, you were asking me about Lone Star, and there were firms before Lone Star that go back to way before, it was, you know, Parker's
Glacier.
Lagoon. So, I mean, this goes back to the early days of settlement, that there was some gravel being taken out of there. So I'm assuming that there was, you know, general seepage from the river, but the rest of it was probably filling up with rainwater, just like it would normally do. So now that we've got this bar there and it was breached, that's how come it's, you know, water's coming in and out, no matter what the flow is, there's still water coming in and out. So that's kind of where I was looking at the similarities, although there, you know, we saw some algae bloom, but it was so minimal compared to, you know, what we have in the Cove. So there are similarities between what situation they have and what we have, except they don't have a direct, super direct connection to the Willamette like we do.
Right, yeah.
Are there other questions for staff?
You know, the only thing I say is regardless if it's a flow through a channel or a flow through subsurface, water is gonna migrate back into the Willamette.
Yeah.
So, you know.
So if any of you gentlemen would like to come up, and we might have questions for you, you might have a comment to make, feel free to do that. While you're on your way up here, just a couple of thoughts that I had from our tour, which was very informative. What I took away from it, a couple of things. First, I don't think there is one solution, because there isn't one solution that's working for them in Oswego Lake. They have to do a couple of different things. The other thing that I noticed from what they said is most of the methods also have a downside if they aren't done exactly right. Whether you apply too much chemical to the water, or you rotate the water and stir up sediment on the bottom that should stay on the bottom and not be stirred up. And I'm not a chemist, but it seems to me like the Cove is going to be even more of a challenge because it's a much smaller volume of water and much more shallow. So it seems like you could overcompensate, over chemical, over stir the water more than you would in a larger body of water like Oswego Lake. So I think that was a challenge. The other thing related to water conditions, I'm hoping that we can find a way to get an evaluation, like the gentleman from the Oswego Lake Corporation suggested, very soon. I mean, within a matter of a few days, hopefully, while we still have hot water, while we still have hot air, and the temperature is still quite high, because very soon it's going to start to cool off and the problem goes away. and we won't really know worst conditions. So those are the thoughts that I took away from the tour. So does anyone have any questions for any of these gentlemen, or should Commissioner Neely?
Well, it's going to be a comment, but it's one that I want them to respond to.
Sure.
I've always had problems with the notion of bringing the Clackamette River water in and letting it go out of the Cove, because it's going to go out probably at a higher temperature than it went in. And as a concern, but the aeration piece I really like. It's not only, it seems to me, that doesn't only oxygenate the water, but I presume there's also evaporation occurring in the process, which may have a cooling effect in the Cove as well. And I don't know if anybody wants to respond to that or not.
I think what I would say about what's just been set up here is, yes, it's a different body of water, it's a different depth, it's a different volume, but you make adjustments on the amount of agitation you're gonna do, through aeration, and you make adjustments as to the amount of chemicals, obviously, for concentration. Why I was intrigued by the lake at Oswego was it may allow us to accomplish what we want to without having to enter into the dredging, because it's a fairly unmoving body of water, which would be a very cost-effective solution. In meeting with these gentlemen, what was said, and correct me if I'm wrong at any time, is it can't be a single study. It needs to be a study over the course of maybe a 12-month period where sampling is taken. Yeah. Because as Mr. Conkle said, we're looking for the factors that influence the condition of the water. Is it temperature? Is it flow rate? Whatever. So these gentlemen are knowledgeable. I know the beauty of avoiding water exchange or adding water is apparently the three basins thing is pretty sacred, and we wouldn't have to transgress that. So if you have any questions, or if you guys want to add any thoughts about what we've discussed to date, or what approach you think we should take, don't be shy. Just say your name and what you have to say about the matter.
Well, I'll make a couple of comments. Richard Craven, and in terms of the dredging and water exchange, keep in mind that there's going to be more bed load movement coming down, and there'll probably be less water exchange as time goes on, because the water won't be able to get out of the Cove. It'll continue to get worse. And what that means to me is that there's going to continue to be a water quality issue in the late summertime. And it's all related to temperature and nutrients. And I'm not exactly sure how do you get rid of that, because I don't know what the nutrients are, phosphates, nitrates, and maybe other things that are promoting algae growth. And the water temperature is probably going to continue to get worse, because there's no water exchange, out of the mouth of the Cove, or there won't be eventually.
I think the piece of knowledge we gained during our tour was that phosphates is the #1 contributor, plus temperature. And the ability to control those maybe will help us avoid a possible dredging requirement. I think. I'm hopeful. So the solutions that I know I'm personally leaning to is whether it be aeration and treatment. And the question is that first thing we have to do, as one of our gentlemen said, is determine the current state, and the current state over maybe a 12-month period as temperatures and flow rates vary. That's the first step we have to do. This is not going to be a short-term project. It's, we have to determine it. It may be like taking 12 sections and seeing what we've got. So these are the guys that have educated me, and I hope they're here to educate you if needed.
Question to staff: have we ever done any kind of analysis of the water in terms of the chemicals that are in the Cove?
Not that I'm aware of.
I think that would be one important thing, is through a whole year's period, is to do that.
And that's why I think that the Stimson study is linked to this in its own way. What is migrating through Stimson into the Cove?
We could have the same, we could be causing our own problem. From one piece of property to the other.
They're complementary studies, actually.
Yeah.
I think something else I would be interested in doing as part of an assessment is determining what kind of wildlife, if any, is living in there. I know that when you talk about temperature, that's part of it, but, are we talking about, are there frogs, or are there lizards, or, are there, other organisms that might be in there? I don't know, and I remember I asked the fellow if there were any fish in Lake Oswego, or Oswego Lake, and he said, well, they're not native.
Yeah, well, that'll be true there. Most of the warm water species of fish are not native.
Yeah, and so he said, I think he said didn't he say they had some carp that somebody had thrown in there?
Yeah, they have carp, they have bass, they have bluegill.
Well, fortunately for us, one of our members, Doug DeHart, used to work, he was Department of Fish and Wildlife, Fisheries, I believe. Is that correct?
Fish and wildlife.
Yeah.
I'd like to give a little background on what I used to see down there. And this is not when I was the age of Dr. McLaughlin. I want you to know that, Doug. I grew up in Westland with this man here, John Borden, and we used to come over there to Clackamette River, because it was clean. The Willamette was filthy, and nobody could be in the Willamette really without getting typhoid and other things. But back in the 70s, we came into the area where Mr. Parker, as you know, it was called Parker Lagoon at one time before it was renamed by the city, where Mr. Parker had been doing his gravel operations and extractions and all the rest, and ran out of gravel. Most of that gravel out of that basin, Clackamette Cove, built Interstate 205, if you're not aware of that, including the Glen Jackson Bridge. A lot of the batching of the concrete occurred there. One way or the other, he ran out of ability to get enough gravel from what remained of the Cove, so they began to barge in gravels from Ross Island, Santa Gravel, other points upriver through the locks when the locks were operating, and actually dredged a 12-foot channel from the mouth of the Clackamas up into the Cove. Well, why is this important? Because there was no gravel bar at that time when John and I were growing up. The gravel bar that we're all so concerned about, that gravel bar is 53 years old this year, basically. And the city, your city, our city, bought the Cove 25 years ago. And between all that, other people tried to do things there, but a dynamic continued to occur, and I'll never forget this, where 100,000 or more salmon and steelhead were being raised, and the community came down to watch them being raised in net pens and help feed them at the old Marine Patrol dock, which is still there in the Cove. And people would come in there and fish at a little higher water times because it was a great fishing area. And then the tide sweeping in, which you know I've talked about that a lot, was an amazing thing to see. So this thing that looks like such a problem, it's not like Lake Oswego, it's different, but it's a tremendous asset that the water quality is very important to the whole thing. But I believe this could be a wonderful community project to enlist youth with the various nonprofits, mine and others, Greater Oregon City Watershed Council and others, to really get in there and do some stuff once we have looked at the issue of the water quality and figured out what is feasible. This could be the signature project that Oregon City brings the community together on, and the result could be a beautiful asset. It already is very beautiful. Everybody thinks that rock bar is terrible. Rock bars raised the Cove 7 feet higher than it used to be over time. It's perched there 7 feet higher, which makes it look a lot bigger than it really is, with backwater sloughs and all sorts of things for wildlife. I think our hope in this group is that we could help you sort through what's feasible, what is not, deal with the water quality in particular, assess what's going on down there, use your knowledge from Lake Oswego that you had last week or two, and see what can be done to really make an incredible community project out of this thing that was dug as a quarry that had no other purpose than gravel, that has recovered a lot naturally, could be a wonderful and incredible community asset for this city.
In my mind, our first task is to determine current state of affairs. And that's the study that we're going to authorize to say what are our current conditions and how do they progress throughout a calendar year. I think the
So
gentleman, go ahead.
As chair, I can't make a motion, but I'm going to suggest that someone make a motion to the effect that we ask Mr. Conkle to reach out to the gentleman with Oswego Lake
Mark
Corporation.
Rosencrantz with Lake Creek.
Took us on the tour, excuse me, yeah. For a proposal from him on what his recommendation would be for the necessary elements of a water quality study. Whether that needs to happen over a year, how often it would have to happen, and bring a proposal back to us, because I think with his background on what he deals with at Lake Oswego, I can't think of that there could be anyone anywhere more knowledgeable that could help us study this water and move forward. So I would, if someone can distill emotion out of what I just said.
Well, you're just suggesting that you were recommending that we ascertain a proposal from, and I don't have his card in front of me. He has a consulting firm. Do you have his name?
Mark Rosencrantz. Mark Rosencrantz?
Mark Rosencrantz's firm to do an assessment of the code.
And I guess a couple of things, if I could
Wait a
just,
second.
for clarity. I think that we're realizing it's probably more than just water temperature. So I'd like to have a discussion about what should we be looking at, right? Water temperature, probably sediment makeup, to get an understanding of what pollutants are coming in there. If
Water quality to me includes all of that. It's the,
Okay.
what is the state of the water? You know, is it pure? Is it contaminated? What's in there? You know, what makes up, when you analyze the water, what is it? What's in it?
And I think, the second part to that is I just want to be careful because I do have contracting law that I do need to follow. So if in my discussions with him, it's apparent it's going to be more than what we're required by state law to go out to get bids on, I'll have to, obviously do that.
Well, I would like to suggest that that you consult with him, but that you get another proposal. I think that's only reasonable and fair. There are probably other people out there, but again, as you stated, may not be quite as qualified, but we need to go through contracting. We're not doing a sole source here. That's not what this is.
I think any of the four gentlemen here could tell us the factors we need to consider. Temperature, water volume or exchange, chemical composition and contribution from outside sources.
Vegetation.
What else? Gentlemen, anything I'm missing?
What makes up the vegetation?
Excuse me.
Is it growing because there's...
Excuse me, my hearing isn't really good, so you'll please bear with me. But I believe the key of the whole thing is, what is the problem you want to solve? And I think Dick has already talked about that. So we're imagining that the first thing you want to do is probably figure out the temperature profile of the cove, correct? And after that, maybe look at nutrients that may be coming from other sources. But prior to that, look at the temperature profile and perhaps do some circulation efforts, perhaps aeration, but I think circulation efforts would be one of the early things I think you'd want to talk about. Now, Dick, please correct me.
Well, I don't have a correction, but basically, yeah, nutrients, phosphates, nitrates primarily, and water temperature, but it would be nice to have that throughout the year, I think, and then a vertical distribution where, the water's deep of water temperature to see what's going on. And if you're going to talk to the consultant, I think he can come up with he's in the business of doing this. He can come up with a nice proposal on what you should look at based on the problems that you're seeing out there in terms of algae growth and so forth.
Say including but not limited to the temperature profile, composition of the water, what's the circulation?
Nutrients.
Yeah, well, the nutrients to me is going to tell us what's in the water. So we could say that including these items but not limited to. And then we'll get more, you know, there's obviously stuff that we're not thinking of, but that's not our business. So I'm okay with adding that.
I still think your water quality encompasses all of that.
I agree. I
And so,
totally agree.
was that a motion?
Yes.
Second.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell?
Aye. Oh, go ahead.
So what are we directing Mr. Conkle to do? Go to that one individual or put out a request for water quality
I
study?
think he needs to get at least 2 proposals, period.
Well, the way to do that is to put out a request.
Right. That's my
Is that-
minimum.
And is that your motion?
Yes.
What do you think? I mean, first, don't we solicit this expertise that's already been afforded us to see what he thinks the study should do? And then if necessary, go out and solicit the bids?
Yeah, I think, there's a couple of ways to do this, right? I mean, one is to have a broad, here's the issue that we see, give us a scope of work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I can probably talk with him, maybe pay him for some help in understanding what a good scope would be and then bid that scope out as well. I think there's a couple ways. If you can let me just work on, I think I understand what the objective is here, and then we can just work through the contracting. So I just don't have, what went from, let's just get some water samples, which was gonna be quick, easy, one and done, right, is now kind of probably an 11th month commitment of, that's probably a little bit different, I think, than what we all were envisioning, after our site visit. So, I think I just want to make sure we just walk through the right steps, get the proposal out there in a way that folks can bid on it or respond to it, with some good knowledge, just having the latitude to understand that what you're asking for is kind of what we believe as the non-experts we need, with some obvious things that we've heard that we do, but there may be other things that come out of this. It's like, oh yeah, we should look at that, right? Like during the winter months, we have the storm pipe that exits into there, probably pool water quality during a big event, right? So I mean, there's just some things that are probably gonna pop up that we address.
I agree with using him to formulate a meaningful proposal.
That somebody can
And then
respond
take a
to.
second step, and then maybe these gentlemen will review it from their perspective and their expertise and say, that looks good, or maybe we should add this, or whatever.
Commissioner Morrow?
Thank you, Chair Mitchell. I was concerned about just going out for one proposal as well, and so I agree with what Commissioner McGriff said about trying to receive multiple. Of course, we would have to regard this in accordance with the law, but so I just wanted to register my concern there, and glad that it was brought up. Thank you, Commissioner. And then just to point out that a potential silver lining of this extension of having to do something over the course of a year is the fact that if we were to get the results right now, we still wouldn't be able to do anything because we don't have the purchasing power to do anything. And so hopefully within that window of time, we would have more clarity from the courts about ways that we can actually spend our money, because it needs to be recognized that if we actually want to do something meaningful here, it's going to have to take an investment from urban renewal. And once we get that go ahead from the courts, I'm looking forward to making that pending the information we get from this study.
A question for Commissioner Morrow. Do you agree with using the gentleman from Lake Oswego, his expertise in helping us formulate a meaningful proposal?
No, I'm fine with that.
Okay.
I'm gonna call the question.
Okay?
Yeah, we can.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell?
Aye.
Commissioner Rocky Smith?
Aye.
Commissioner Denise McGriff?
Aye.
Commissioner Doug Neely?
Aye.
Commissioner Adam Morrow?
Aye.
Chair Mike Mitchell?
Aye. Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, last item on our agenda is approval of urban renewal draft minutes from July 19th, 2023. Any corrections or additions?
I move that they be approved as submitted.
Second.
Commissioner
Second. Go ahead.
Frank O'Donnell?
Aye.
Commissioner Rocky Smith?
Aye.
Commissioner Denise McGriff?
Aye.
Commissioner Doug Neely?
Abstain.
Commissioner Adam Morrow?
Aye.
And Chair Mike Mitchell?
Aye. Any communications?
No, sir.
We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.